Welcome to the Learning Hub's video on semicolons, the most elusive of punctuation marks. Have you struggled with what a semicolon is and how to use it properly in your writing? This video will teach you what a semicolon is, when it is appropriate to use them, and how to determine if a semicolon works in your sentences. So firstly, what the heck even is a semicolon? A semicolon acts as a break in thought like an elongated pause, longer than a comma, but shorter than a period. The semicolon looks like a comma with a period above it, and this can be a good way to remember what it does. The main function of a semicolon is to separate two independent clauses that deserve to be in the same sentence, but it can also be used to separate items in a list that contains commas. Before I move on though, here's a usage tip. Do not use semicolons too frequently. It is easy to overuse them to add sophistication, when in fact it can overcomplicate your writing. Many professors frown on using your semicolons like glitter in a kindergarten craft project. Sparing is best. So anyway, let's take a look at how a semicolon can separate independent clauses. If you need more information on what an independent clause is, check out our handout or other resources through our website. In short, an independent clause is another way of saying complete sentence. So if you have two complete sentences that are related to each other, they can be combined using a semicolon. Here's an example of an appropriate use of a semicolon to separate two independent clauses. As Ron was driving the Ford Anglia, Harry opened a map of Great Britain. The chance of the car falling behind the Hogwarts Express was great. This example is using a semicolon appropriately because there are two complete sentences on either side of the semicolon, the two ideas are closely related, the extended pause helps link the ideas better together, and there is a smoother rhythm established instead of using a period. The semicolon here also builds an inferential relationship between the two ideas that would be lost without the semicolon. Here's another example, but this time we have an inappropriate use of a semicolon trying to separate two independent clauses. As Ron was driving the Ford Anglia, Harry pulled out a map of Great Britain. The Scottish countryside was gorgeous in the fall. While this example is technically correct since both clauses on either side of the colon are independent, they do not relate closely enough without further explanation. In other words, it is unclear how Harry pulling out a map of Britain relates to the beauty outside the car. It would make more sense to use this opportunity to expand on action inside the car or explain why the map was necessary. Here I will briefly mention that semicolons often combine two independent clauses with a conjunctive adverb, a word like consequently, however, therefore, etc. The semicolon in this case connects the two clauses by providing context for how the two clauses relate. In these types of sentences, the semicolon should precede this connecting word, followed by a comma. If you find yourself using these conjunctive adverbs in the middle of your sentences, see if a semicolon would be an appropriate choice to separate out the ideas more fully while retaining them in a single sentence. The other appropriate use of a semicolon is to separate complex lists. When creating a list, sometimes it is necessary to add additional information and a mini-list inside the main part of that list. In these situations, offsetting all this extra information will make it confusing if the mini-list or additional information is part of the main list. Adding a semicolon will provide better separation between these ideas. Let's check out an example. The panel consisted of Professor Snape, the potions master, Professor Flitwick, the charms instructor, and Professor McGonagall, the transfiguration instructor. In this example, we're providing additional context about each professor, so to keep our reader from getting confused, we've added semicolons between each person in our list. Here's a different example. Dolores Umbridge dislikes non-human creatures like centaurs, goblins, and giants, disorder and chaos, and Harry Potter. Here, only the first part of the list has additional commas, but semicolons would still be appropriate to avoid confusion. Last we checked, Harry Potter wasn't a non-human creature. Well, that's up for debate, but we don't want to label him that way, so semicolons it is. Now I realize this is all great and wonderful, but I hear you asking, how do I fix my semicolon usage when I'm in the editing stage and hoping to turn my paper in soon? I don't have time to wax poetically about the intrinsic aesthetic of the semicolon. Well, here's a tip. In order to use a semicolon, each sentence on both sides of the semicolon must be able to stand alone as a complete sentence. You can cover up each portion of the sentence until the semicolon, and then say each part out loud. Here's an example. Hermione received the best grades of her year. Consequently, she received a well-paying job at the ministry. Now, if we cover up the bottom half of the sentence to look at the top half and read it out loud to ourselves, you can see that it is in fact a sentence. Hermione received the best grades of her year. And then if we cover up the top half of the sentence, leaving the bottom half, you can see it also can stand alone as a sentence. Consequently, she received a well-paying job at the ministry. As you can see from this example, both halves of the sentence can exist by themselves, happy and free of their significant other clause. Not that they'd want to, though. They are happy to be married via their semicolon vow, forever to exist, side by side as one. Try this technique with your own sentences to see if you've got wedded sentence bliss, or if you need to divorce your partners in light of the greater good. To close, we'd just like to note that in a draft, the semicolon often provides a convenient link between thoughts. However, in revising, you may discover that some of these linked statements ought to stand alone. Don't be afraid to experiment with your sentence structures to play with the pacing and flow of your ideas. We hope you've enjoyed this video on semicolons. If you'd like to see more, please check out our website, contact us, or come visit us in the Brookins Library building. Like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you think of our resources. Thank you so much and have a semicolon-filled day.